And today we're joined by author David Zimmerman. He has a phenomenal new Packers book. 'Tis the season this time of the year, David. The legendary Green Bay Packers, how the legend was built. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome.
So how was the legend built? It's, one of those questions that just immediately comes to mind.
You got about an hour? It's,
exactly.
Well, first you got to have the victories. Through the years, the Packers were probably one of the most successful clubs in professional football. But getting started is a very interesting story. When you talk about the legend, you say, well, this is like a myth or a story. It's too good to be true, and that's pretty much the Packers story. It's too good to be true when you start back in the beginning and go forward.
And you know what I find interesting, David, is one of the things you do is you highlight how the press actually helped the team get the publicity it needed when there were some dark days for the franchise.
Well, there was no television, radio, and newspapers. That was it in terms of publicity, and building the whole legend story was done by the reporters from various cities, basically Green Bay, Milwaukee. So that's how it started, from the standpoint of building these players up through the press and through the radio. And
I find it almost hard to believe now, because the NFL has become such a juggernaut, but back in the 20s and 30s, the pro game was not looked at very highly. The college game was actually thought of more highly. True. And they really needed to build this thing up, didn't they?
Well, they were nothing in those days. And you look at the uniforms that they had in those days, you can say, what a ragtag group. Yeah, football, professional football in the 20s and 30s was not anywhere what it is today.
When you write a book like this, who do you talk to? I mean, obviously, some of the people, unfortunately, have passed on and things like that, but who do you really focus on, and who do you talk to get the great knowledge that you have?
Well, I started this book about 15 years ago when I started my book on Lambeau. And I was talking to a lot of the folks who, are, as you said, are gone today, but I got a lot of my material from folks who are no longer here. Art Daly and Lee Remo would be two. So you look back and you say, those are the folks, and the journalists at that time were a different breed. The way the Packers were covered in those days was a little bit different than it is today, of course. But
well, and maybe expand upon that, where back then, like I know Art Daly, and I met Art Daly a number of times. He basically felt like he didn't really want to write anything negative about the team and really wanted the team to succeed.
Well, he was told that by the board of directors, say keep it upbeat and cheerful and spread it if you need to, and he did. But he was an optimist from the get-go, and that's the way he wrote his articles. And I loved his writing. I can remember when I first started to follow the Packers. There's a little story to that. If you got a minute, I'll
absolutely.
My first game was that I ever saw with the Packers was in 1949. I had a broken arm in high school, so I was a freshman, and I climbed the back of the stadium. I'll show you later how I did that. But you can come up the back of the stadium. You got these beams that go up, and you can come up over the top. And I sat there on about the 30-yard line. I think it was about halfway through. I'd been the previous week in Madison watching the Badgers play. So this was. I came back after the game, went to the library, and stole all of the Green Bay Press-Gazette sports section.
I think the statute of limitations had kicked in, so nobody will prosecute you.
And she caught me one day. She said, why don't you just buy the darn thing, and you don't have to keep stealing every one of these. And that's when I started my scrapbook, and I guess you could say that's when I really became a fan of the Packers. But who isn't?
Exactly, and this is the old City Stadium?
Old City Stadium,
that you were sneaking into and getting into games for free? That is unbelievable. Now a high school stadium, Green Bay
Well,
East.
Everybody snuck in those days. They were snuck in underneath or over the top or whatever, but a lot of kids, young kids, snuck into the game in those years.
What do you feel about the success today? Some people say, okay, it's not enough just to get to the NFC Championship game. And knowing what you know, David, how touch and go it was that the team didn't even exist, what do you think of the success today?
Well, it's unequaled. People are almost taking the Packers for granted. It's like take Mike McCarthy's 4-game losing streak here recently last year, and everybody was all over him. And I'm thinking, wait, look at this guy's record, for Pete's sake. How many teams get in the championship season year after year after year? So I think the success of the Packers is almost to the point where now it's expected. And you look back and you say, well, that's not true with most teams.
And you know probably more about Curly Lambeau than almost anybody. You wrote the first official biography on the man. The man's name obviously is on the side of the stadium. He was a character off the field, but on the field, how good of a coach and how much is he credited for, or should be credited for what we have today?
Well, Lambeau was a motivator more than he was a coach. He was a player, and he played the first, I don't know, maybe 10 years before he became just the coach. He was a motivator and a great talent of young people that he would locate. So he brought in great people. The coaching standpoint, he got a lot of help from the players themselves. Coaching was not his strong suit, but motivation and getting good players into the early 20s, 30s, 40s was his strong suit, I think.
And when people read this book, what do you want them to get across? What do you want people to feel when they read your book, David?
Well, I thought about this, and I said, you know, people read this today and they say, this is a story that's almost too good to be true. And if somebody told you this story, they would say, I don't believe it. This is this is like Mary Poppins kind of thing. You know? It's just a make-believe. But it's a great story in so many ways that I would say that what I would like people to come away with is learn the history of the Packers, because it helps you appreciate what's going on today.
And a lot of times they say that the movies are too good to be true. Sometimes real life is better than the movie. I guess basically that's what you're saying.
I would say so, yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And any other stories that you have that in your time that you've come across that just blow your mind, or anybody that you've come across that have said, I haven't heard that story in 40 years, 50 years, any of that stuff?
Oh boy, I don't know. A lot of the old timers. I can sit with somebody who's my age and we start talking about the Packers, and it's a whole different rapport that you build up and talk about. Nowadays, they don't have a clue what went on in the 20s, 30s, and 40s and how the Packers got started. So I would say that I would hope that people will read this and say, my God, there's so much here. That this is an amazing story. Remember when they first started, the Packers are still the smallest city in the NFL.
Right.
Playing teams in the beginning, they were playing teams that were from Chicago and Detroit, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and the size of Green Bay at the time was around 30,000.
Wow. And now it's 100,000, still the smallest, but
Right.
but they're still plugging along.
That's right.
Unbelievable. Well, David Zimmerman, the legendary Green Bay Packers, How the Legend Was Built. Thanks for taking the time today. It's a very interesting read.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for watching right here on today's TMJ4.